Which one of you owns Bitcoins? Okay, that's a good number of hands. So to the question for the people who own Bitcoin, which one of you have actually used Bitcoin to either send money to someone else or make a transaction before? Few hands. Okay, keep that in mind. I'm going to show you a very interesting statistic later on, because I'm going to talk about Bitcoin's growing energy problem. And if I'm going to do that, I first want to talk a bit about Bitcoin in general. You all know, or most of you will probably know, that Bitcoin is a digital currency created, or Satoshi Nakamoto, the guy who invented it in 2008, launched in 2009. And in essence, Bitcoin isn't that special. It's money, just as we already have digital euros or digital dollars. What's the thing about Bitcoin is that it runs on a network of distributed computers. That means it's not backed by any bank or government. And that is what really makes Bitcoin special. Every computer in this distributed network receives, shares, and validates all transactions, all information that goes around the network. And on every 10 minutes, on average, the whole network comes to an agreement on the current state of the underlying blockchain. You've all heard that term before, the blockchain, the underlying technology that we can either use for Bitcoin, we can use it for other things as well. What happens is that every 10 minutes, one of the nodes in the Bitcoin network is selected to provide the next block of transactions for the underlying blockchain, and it literally becomes a chain of blocks filled with transaction information. Now, doing that random selection is quite a challenge, to be honest. And I want to tell you a bit more about why that is the case. Because if you're in a distributed network where there is no central authority, how are you going to do that random selection? There is no party, there is no one, no government that's going to tell you, hey, you are the next one that's going to create the next block for the blockchain. Additionally, there are some problems in the network like that. There is no central numbering, there is no central clock. Worst of all, the nodes are distributed and they probably don't all see the complete network. And they will only see parts of the network. So how do you manage to come up with a consensus algorithm that actually succeeds in getting the network aligned? Satoshi Nakamoto, he had a brilliant solution, because what he did, he created this chain, this hash-based chain of proof of work. And that actually, for the people that know blockchain, that has several consequences. It fixes a double spend problem. It makes sure that ultimately the data on that blockchain is immutable. What I want to talk about specifically is how that ensures or helps doing this random selection in a distributed network. Because what's going on is the computers in the network, they're going to be doing what we call mining. They're going to constantly participate in what you could effectively see as a really, really big lottery. And they are constantly just posting numbers. So there's a winning number defined up front, and they are posting numbers every second of the day, non-stop, trying to guess the winning number. And if they manage to get the right number, they get to create the next block for the Bitcoin blockchain. And they are rewarded for that. So for every block that is created, they get a reward of 12.5 Bitcoins, which is the incentive to participate in this system. On the other hand, they have to have special machines running to come up with these numbers and expend electricity, so they also have some cost. What I want to focus on first is how many computations are these machines doing. So the graph on the screen will show you exactly how many calculations the network is doing. It has been growing exponentially over time. At this very time, the whole network is doing well over 25 quintillion calculations every second of the day, and it doesn't stop. And actually, this graph is a bit old. If you would look today, it would be over 40 quintillion calculations. That's an insane number. And especially if you consider that the Bitcoin network only processes 2 to 3 transactions per transaction. So 2 to 3 transactions every second versus 40 quintillion calculations. You already get a bit of a feeling of why this system is so extremely energy hungry. All of these calculations are not made by any regular computer. In the early days of Bitcoin, that was the case. Everyone with a computer at home could just join in the system, start mining, be rewarded. And then at some point, people started developing specialized hardware. And they discovered that you have economies of scale, so they will put whole facilities full with thousands and thousands of these machines. There are massive farms, facilities, data centers in China with 20,000 of these machines and more, just running non-stop, 24/7, generating numbers, trying to make a new block for the blockchain and be rewarded for that. I said they get 12.5 Bitcoin. I think the rate today is somewhere between $6,000 to $7,000 per coin. So if you get 12.5 Bitcoin, that's a pretty significant reward that you're competing for. So we get an idea of how big this is, but we don't really know yet how much is it consuming exactly, and more importantly, where is it going? And by when will we get to that point? There are a few ways we can actually determine that. So in the, let's say, the early days of people looking at this problem, and there weren't many, I must say this is actually, if you are a user of Bitcoin, you will never be confronted with the energy cost of the system, because ultimately the miners are the ones paying for it. So this wasn't a problem that kept many people busy in the early day. And what they did in those early days was they would just take the whole network computational power, just as I showed you before, we can estimate that. And they would just look at a list of available machines in the market, like shown on the screen again. And they would figure, well, okay, if these machines, for example, the N-miner S9 is the most efficient machine out there, we can just take the total computational power of that network, we divide it by the computational power of that machine. We know how much power it uses, so the whole network must roughly consume an X amount of power. Now that is a good approach to a certain extent, because it will tell us something. It will tell us a lower bound to how much energy, electrical energy, this network is consuming. Today that would be as much as a country like Ireland in total, which is already a massive number, and there are some problems with this approach. Because as you can see, there are multiple types of machines available. They don't all have the same efficiencies. Worse, if you put thousands of those machines in a single facility, they're going to generate a lot of heat. You're going to need additional cooling. That's not going to show up in the network's computational power, but it will require additional electricity simply to cool all those machines again. And there's no way we can actually pinpoint exactly how much that is. So we know the network uses a lot of electricity by using this approach, but we don't really get a good feeling for how much it is exactly. Well, I spent a lot of time researching this topic, and I started to approach this problem from a different angle, a more economic angle. Because another thing we can observe from the Bitcoin network is how much money these miners are earning. They are earning 5 billion per year in total for the whole network. What we can do then is we can try to figure how much of that electricity is going to, or how much of that money, how much of that revenue is going to be spent on electricity costs. Because miners have roughly two cost components, one being their capital expenses, the other part is mainly electricity. So what's shown on the screen is roughly, if you look at the lifetime of these machines, what part of that is going to electricity. And it kind of depends a bit on the actual lifetime of a machine, but if you take up to 2 years, it can easily be the case that 70% will ultimately end up in electricity costs. This is very useful because we can actually use this information will tell us something where energy consumption is going to be in the future if we follow basic economic principles that tell us that miners will be adding machines to the network for as long as it's profitable to do. That's the basic economic assumption. If it's profitable to add more machines, you will add more machines. And if they get to that equilibrium point where it's no longer profitable to add more machines, at that point we would expect them to spend maybe 70%, 60% on electricity. So this gives us a bit of a feeling, like based on revenue, where's the energy consumption of Bitcoin going? What it doesn't tell us is when we're going to reach that number. For that we need to look at something else, because we can see perhaps maybe the Bitcoin price will double overnight and then the miners will earn twice the money. That doesn't mean the whole Bitcoin network will consume twice as much electricity overnight. That's not going to happen. So there needs to be time to allow for the production of these new machines. And we actually get some information for that. Because the interesting thing is that Bitcoin miners, they are very secretive about what they do. Bitcoin mining rig manufacturers, they're also very secretive about what they're doing, how much they're earning and stuff like that. They don't share it. But what we do know is that the biggest manufacturer of these mining machines, called Bitmain, they are getting their chips from the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, and we know exactly how many chips they can make because the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company is very transparent about how much they are delivering to this Bitmain company. So based on that, we can extract how fast the whole Bitcoin network could be at expected future consumption. And actually, what we then find is that the whole network could be consuming as much electricity as a country like Austria by the end of this year already. And it's already pretty close to that point. So as you can see, along with the dramatic increase in the Bitcoin price over the past year, we have also seen an explosion in the energy consumption of this network. Whereas currently it's already close to a country like Switzerland. I just want to talk you through some key statistics of the network at this time. Because if we're talking about the Bitcoin network, and you follow my approach, you will see that, okay, this network is consuming something like 70 terawatt hours of electricity per year, which is as much as a country like Chile. But if you then look a bit further and realize that the whole network is only processing 200,000 transactions per day, we find that the average energy consumption per transaction is roughly 1,000 kilowatt hours per transaction. I'm from the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, an average Dutch household consumes maybe 3,500 kilowatt hours of electrical energy per year. So 1,000 kilowatt hours of electrical energy per Bitcoin transaction, literally me sending anyone money, that's gigantic, it's insane. And I just want to continue by including some other countries as well, because I mentioned we have an array of countries we can compare Bitcoin as a whole with. We can compare it to the Czech Republic, we're already past that, or Switzerland, we're going to be close to Austria soon. And if you compare it to maybe a country like Germany, then okay, it's not that bad yet, but then the Bitcoin network is already consuming as much electrical energy as more than 15% of all of Germany. That's pretty big, that's pretty big. Now let's try to compare this with the traditional system, because this will give us a bit more insight in how big this problem actually is. We know that for a Visa transaction, it will require maybe 1 to 2 watt hours of electrical energy. I already mentioned for a Bitcoin transaction that's 1,000 kilowatt hours. So if we compare one Bitcoin transaction to 100,000 Visa transactions, Bitcoin will still require up to 10 times more electrical energy per transaction. So there's a huge difference, almost 1 million times more electrical energy per Bitcoin transaction than we need for a Visa transaction. And actually, Bitcoin isn't the only currency that has this proof of work algorithm. Bitcoin isn't the only currency that has this proof of work that causes that huge number. The second biggest currency at the moment is Ethereum, which consumes maybe as much electrical energy as a country like Azerbaijan. So together, all of those proof of work currencies, they are already consuming 0.5% of the world's total electrical energy. Imagine that, for a system that's not really serving that many people. But then again, I do want to know that there is a reason for all those electrical energy expenses. Because at one hand, yes, that number is very big. On the other hand, it's also part of what makes Bitcoin safe. The fact that we have to spend electrical energy if we want to take control over the network, over the Bitcoin network and attack it, is part of what makes it secure. You need to have the money, you need to have the machines if you want to attack the network. So even though it is a huge cost, the other side of the story is that it's also part of what makes Bitcoin safe. So the real question we should ask is it really worth the cost? And then it really comes down to, well, how are we going to be using Bitcoin? Are we using Bitcoin merely for speculation? Or are we using Bitcoin? I don't know. If you are, imagine being someone in Venezuela at this time, and you're facing 13,000% of inflation just this year alone. You probably would want some Bitcoins then. So it kind of depends on your perspective whether or not this is going to be worth it. But for most of the Western world, if you're using Bitcoin, or you would be using Bitcoin to, I don't know, buy your coffee or your everyday stuff, you might find that you still prefer to use the regular old financial system. I want to spend a bit of time on how this may change in the future. So what we can establish at this time is that the Bitcoin network just isn't sustainable at all, which is primarily caused by that thing we call proof of work. Now the good news is that this technology is constantly developing. We see that the developers, especially in Ethereum, they are very aware of this energy consumption problem. So they are actively trying to make changes to how the current system works. They are working on alternatives called proof of stake. Whereas Bitcoin is based on a system that requires machines, computational power, proof of stake is a system whereas consensus is reached based on how much money you have. It doesn't require all of those calculation power. Well, that's very good news if we can get it to work. We don't know yet. These things are in active development. And as I was saying, the fact that we are expending something in Bitcoin, the fact that we are spending electricity, is part of what makes it secure. So what are we going to be expanding in proof of stake? Because we have to consider that ultimately, in a public blockchain, we are going to be in an environment where there will be bad actors. There will be people who want to try to take control over the system, that will try to take advantage of the system. So there needs to be a cost associated with attacking a network like that. Can we properly embed that in proof of stake? Do we need to come up with a hybrid solution? There are alternative solutions as well. They are called proof of burn, they're called proof of time. We don't know yet if they are going to work. Nevertheless, it's very important that we get it to work. I remember the Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, I think he once said, I don't want my legacy to be a currency that consumes as much as a country like Cyprus. Well, in the meanwhile, it's consuming twice as much. So I'm pretty sure that he still feels the same way. He doesn't want that to be his legacy. So he's actively trying to make sure that the system will migrate to something more sustainable, something that doesn't require energy. Proof of stake doesn't require all that energy. Yet in the meanwhile, we are going to have to deal with the energy consumption of the system currently. And what we see is that we can leave it either to the insiders, but also from the outside, we are seeing that more pressure is being applied to these mining facilities all over the place. So we saw some mining facilities that were being set up in New York, the state of New York. And what happened there was the local energy rates, the residential energy rates went up because everyone came there to get cheap power. What the state did was they levied a special rate for miners, so the cost went up, and effectively it scared them away again. That's something local governments can do. You can put, well, in the end, ultimately mining always takes place in a physical location. So it's very easy for a government to turn down these physical miners. At the same time, we have to realize that mining can be done all over the globe. So if one country turns down Bitcoin mining, it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. It just means that it's going to go to another location. So it's not really a perfect fix, but at least there's things we can do about this on the short term and put pressure on the developers to come up with a more sustainable alternative. I want to stress how important that is, because I want you to realize as well that the network doesn't just consume an extreme amount of electrical energy. We also see that a big part of that energy is coming from coal-based electricity. Now, coal is probably the most polluting kind of electricity. And at the other hand, we do see that a big part of these miners, they are using hydropower, which is a renewable energy source for their mining operations. But even then, we're not really addressing the problem. This happened in the state of Quebec, where they have abundance of hydropower. It attracted a lot of these mining facilities. And what happened is the neighboring state, they wanted to clean up their energy grid. So they went to Quebec and they asked, can we get that energy? No, you can't, because it's going to the miners now. So rather than cleaning up the neighboring state's electricity grid, all that power goes to Bitcoin mining. So effectively, we're not really doing mining in a sustainable way. We're just displacing something. We're just taking the clean electricity away, or we're stopping the clean electricity from cleaning the neighboring state's electricity grid. So that's something we have to account for. At one hand, we have this coal-based electricity, and on the other hand, we may have hydropower, but then again, what are we sacrificing for that? So this is an environmental issue of pretty big proportions. I want to put that in a bit of a different perspective as well. The whole Bitcoin network took about 2 years to get to its current point, where it's consuming 0.5% of the global electrical energy. At the same time, we took decades to get almost 2% of our energy from solar. So just think about it. We took 2 years to spend a quarter of that amount on Bitcoin. Yes, this is really a big environmental issue. If we are serious about reaching our climate goals, we really have to do something about it. So it's important that even though it will be hard for the international community to actually do something about it, because in the end you might create some waterbed effect that causes miners to move to another location, we should try to coordinate internationally to put pressure on the developers and hopefully assist them as well to come up with this cleaner alternative, the ones I mentioned before, like the proof of stake, that can help cleaning up this technology tremendously. Now that's Bitcoin. Now I want to state some last few words about blockchain technology in general, because what does this ultimately mean if we are trying to use blockchain technology? And the good news is, not so much. I know I've been very negative about Bitcoin during these past few minutes, but I do want to point out, if we're going to use blockchain technology, which is more general than just Bitcoin, then we don't necessarily have this energy consumption problem, because ultimately the blockchain software is customizable. You can put in different consensus algorithms, and they don't have to be as energy consuming as the whole Bitcoin network is. So if you're going to use a blockchain for something, don't worry too much. You'll be fine. Just get some good developers, and they will actually tell you how to do this without requiring you to, burn this much energy and be part of a very, very big problem. And that's kind of all I wanted to share with you today, so thank you very much.
Alex, thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Are there any questions from the audience for Alex? Admit it, there are questions. I can see you guys, your brains are working. Yes, right over here. Thanks, there's a mic coming to you.
So you mentioned that Ethereum is going to the proof of stake mechanism. Do you think it's likely that Bitcoin will also change its proof of work mechanism?
It's a very difficult question to answer. So what we have seen over the past year is that, or actually the past few years, is that the Bitcoin community is very reluctant to make big changes to their system. And that's going to be a problem. Now, the thing is, you don't need everyone in the system to agree on a potential change. So part of the Bitcoin community could decide we want to make this change, and we just split from the Bitcoin, but then it becomes a question, okay, what do the people? We already seen Bitcoin split a few times over the past few years, and Bitcoin is still the biggest one, despite the advantages that the alternatives offer. So it's really hard to make a prediction on that. So I think the most important thing is the Bitcoin blockchain is software. It can be upgraded, so it could be implemented in Bitcoin as well. Whether that will actually happen, we'll have to see.
Thank you. Right over here. Third, fourth row. Thank you.
There was a slide showing the energy consumption, a Bitcoin transaction in comparison to those 100,000 Visa transactions. Was the energy consumption graphed by transaction, or was it by mining? So was it really just one Bitcoin transaction in comparison to those 100,000 Visa transactions?
Yeah, that was really the average per Bitcoin transaction compared to the average per Visa transaction.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
Yes, it's really that bad. I'm sorry.
We have time for one more question, if there are any. In that case, you'll be available later on if anybody pops up a question, right?
Sure.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Big round of applause, please. Thank you.